Welcome to the Jeremy and Andy Talk Movies podcast. I am
Yeah,
Jeremy,
I am Andy.
and this week we are doing something that we love to do. We're talking about a new movie,
Yes.
and we're talking about a new horror movie, a movie that has
Yeah.
had one of, I would say, the best marketing campaigns in recent memory. Um,
Oh yeah.
because I'll say this, I am not a fan of horror movies.
Right.
You obviously very much are.
hmm
The marketing got me interested in this one. So, not just Andy, that I'm a good podcast partner who would say, sure, you want us to do a horror movie, let me do it. But I'll say, like we said, the marketing did a great job on this one of just building curiosity. That's really what previews should do. They should build curiosity. Too many previews just give you everything rather than building curiosity.
Yeah, they're supposed to build curiosity, not lay out every beat of the movie from start to finish. Yeah,
Yeah. And
absolutely.
honestly, I knew so little about this movie from the marketing and, kind of intentionally. Like, I didn't want to have anything spoiled for me. I knew, some of the actors in it. I knew it was a horror movie. I didn't even really know, like, what kind of horror movie I was getting, supernatural, not supernatural, like
hmm
type of deal until I was in the theater.
Yeah,
And then, just sort of got to experience it pretty untainted, pretty fresh perspective, I would say. Um,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
It was pretty similar for me too. I'd seen the. I don't even know if it was. Well, I take it back. This marketing started months ago, where they were dropping these cryptic teasers and not even telling you what the movie was or what it was called. They were doing these little, and maybe they were only on social media, I don't know, these little snippets of like a snippet of a trailer that was doing like all the cryptic symbols and the algorithm type of stuff, and you're going like, whoa, what is this? And just like, I remember one, it was just full of like really creepy like phrases and sayings, and then as it went along. But yeah, I had seen one full length trailer for it, which I didn't feel like did a whole lot of damage. It did everything it's supposed to do. It made me want to see the movie without really giving a whole lot away. And so yeah, I would say, I don't know if you're going to talk about this later. This is like you said, the best marketing campaign to me in years. I mean, in a long, long time. So kudos to Neon, the studio that released this movie.
And it's not just us saying that our personal preference for the way preview should be. This is borne out in the fact that it is done well box office wise.
Yeah.
My theater was not quite packed, but it had as many people in a theater as I've had in a while for an opening
hmm
movie. People were going to see this movie in large part because the marketing. It's not
Uh,
because any name associated with it is such a big box office draw. It had to be good marketing that got people to this theater.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, Nick Cage, is not a box office draw anymore. I mean, I hate to say that, but he's just not. We talked a couple weeks ago about our love for, when he was doing The Rock and Face Off and Con Air and, Gone in 60 Seconds and National Treasure, he was a box office draw. But, he's just descended too far into the direct to video or direct to, whatever platform movies, and he's just not the draw anymore. So, I'm like you though. My theater was really, really full. I'm not going to say packed, but really full as any theater I've been to this year.
Yeah, and about that, just a little aside as my movie watching experience is, I actually went and did a double feature. I watched Fly Me to the Moon and then
Yeah, I figured you would.
Longlegs. And so for the second movie, I was like, I'm going to get some snacks for this movie since I've been here for a while. Got
hmm
popcorn and M&Ms and M's and a drink, and immediately regretted the decision because I don't like to be a loud snacker. I don't like people who are loud snackers in the movie. And this movie is so quiet. I felt
Yes,
like I could never take a bite of my snacks. And every time the volume would start to go up, I'd be like, get a bite. And then it'd get quiet again. And I'd be like, oh gosh, I'm that guy. So I was like, this was the wrong movie for snacks.
there was a person right behind us. God bless them. They were trying so hard to eat their snacks quietly. I could just tell, and it was yeah, it was very noticeable. Now, did you have a hard time seeing these two movies in the same day because they're very similar? Fly Me to the Moon and Longlegs. Did you get confused at some points as to
I
which movie
kept
you were watching?
I kept mixing up which Nicolas Cage I
Yeah,
was watching,
yeah,
because
it's very, very confusing. I'm sure. I wonder which one stole from the other one.
You get this sometimes. You get Armageddon and Deep Impact. You
Yeah, you
get
get Longlegs and Fly
Dante's
Me to the
Peak
Moon.
and Volcano. Yeah.
Volcano. Yeah, very very similar experience, I'm sure.
Oh my gosh, that's a great joke, Andy. That was
You're welcome.
yeah.
You're welcome. I just came up with that just now.
All right, so um, let's go ahead and get into talking this movie. I do want to talk for this one for a little bit, spoiler free,
Okay.
because I want to give a chance to give a little feedback, maybe get some people interested in it who aren't normally, and then talk spoilers. So let's try to stay without spoilers. But I want to throw this to you because you are the horror movie aficionado, and I have a very strong inclination of how you were going to feel about this movie. So I wanted
Yeah.
to let you go on this one.
There's going to be no surprise here. I think I'm ready to say probably my favorite movie of the year so far. Um, gosh, a movie that I just loved, a movie that they don't make anymore. And I'll hold off on my spoilers, but just I was so taken by how well this movie does from the second it starts of just having that sense of dread. And I'm telling you, when this movie started, I don't mean to sound hokey or exaggerate or kind of try to make something out of nothing, but like I swear the vibe in the theater changed when that movie started. It was a busy theater. People were, laughing and eating snack. You could hear different conversations. People had their phones, da da da. All that stuff was fine because nothing had started yet. The movie started, and the vibe and the feeling in the room just changed. And people you could tell were tense almost, I think, and yet like a combination of like tense but also really ready to let this movie unfold in front of them. And I just was so fascinated by this movie. I was fascinated by the performances, and it did the thing that I've decided since we've started doing this podcast and talking movies so much, that my new favorite thing that a movie can do is just stay with you after days after you've seen it. And that's just a great feeling. And this is a movie I think that will stay with me for a long long time, and that I will look forward to revisiting. I'm actually going to see it again on Tuesday of this week. And um we talk about it a lot in this age where and I guess it's always been this way, but these movies that just you watch them, maybe they're okay, maybe they're terrible, whatever, and they're just gone from your life. And this is a movie that just felt like it, just is going to camp out in my brain for a long time. And that is just and I mean that in the best way possible. I mean that as the highest compliment. And this movie accomplished that. You'd never know where it's going. Like it follows some familiar beats as far as like the crime procedural type of situation. But I mean, in the first couple minutes, there's a kind of a big shock, and it just keeps you guessing. But it never felt like to me like it was leaning too heavily into the, ooh, guess what we're gonna do. It's just watching this story unfold, and spending time with mostly the Mika Monroe character. I just couldn't have been happier with this. I loved it so much.
That's exactly what I was expecting to hear you
Yeah,
say.
I know it's
I
not surprising.
I walked to that movie. I said, Andy is going to love that movie.
Yeah,
It's going to be one of his favorites of the year. I bet. Like it
yeah.
just knowing you and your taste, I was like, this.
Hmm.
He's the target demographic
Oh
for that
my
movie.
gosh.
Did you go see it alone, or did you go see it with anyone?
I saw it with my dad. Normally, I
Okay,
would see it with Molly, my scary
right.
movie watching partner. She was out of town for the weekend. She had a previous engagement, and so I'm taking her. We're going to go on Tuesday, and I can't wait to hear to get her thoughts on it.
Yeah, I was kind of curious about that. If Molly was your
Yeah.
watching partner.
She was furious with me, by the way, that I went to see this without her. She will hold a grudge for a long time, I think.
Gotcha. Yeah, I went alone because I don't have anybody locally that's a horror movie fan,
Mm.
friend to go with that I would know would be into it. Um, so yeah, walking out of this movie, I thought, I know Andy's gonna love this movie. He's the target demographic. I am not.
Hmm.
Now, this is what I'll say. I really respected and appreciated this movie, and it had me locked in the entire time.
That's great.
Afterwards, I looked back and I said, this movie is either going to age really great for me or really poorly, just depending on several of these questions I have in my head. And when I rewatch it, if it makes more sense and I go, oh man, that was brilliant, or if I rewatch
Hmm.
and go like I still don't get that. So,
Right.
um, and we'll get that to a little more in the spoiler section. But uh, yeah, I walked out and I was like, really respect this movie, really well made. And in the end, it hasn't sunk in for me yet. But I will say it's
Hmm.
one I also went and immediately I kind of wanted to read like the trivia and some of the response. It's one of
Yeah.
those movies I kind of want to see like people who are really into the genre and like can break down stuff do like a breakdown like let me explain the things you missed in this movie
Hmm.
because I feel like there probably is a,
Yeah.
some good stuff in there. Uh, but yeah, well, and I'll get into some of those specifics of like what my questions are
Sure.
when we go into spoilers. But yeah, so I would say it's even as me, someone on the lower end of who's not a horror movie fan and isn't going to love this movie. It's not going to be in my top five. I do think this is a movie worth seeing for anybody who just
Hmm.
enjoys seeing movies.
Yeah. I think it's going to turn into a great internet movie. And what I mean by that, it's just like you said, a movie where people are doing TikToks about it and, oh, did you catch this? Or did you notice this? Or, and I don't even know, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if this is the kind of movie where there's little things hidden in the background. Or did you notice like this character had this book on their bookcase and this, you know what I mean? Like one of those type of deals. And a movie that I think a lot of people will theorize about,
Yeah.
which and sometimes that gets ridiculous and it really, people really go far down the rabbit hole. I think this will become an internet movie, but in a good way. I think. I don't know that, but that's what I think will happen.
All right. We will get into spoilers now for anybody who hasn't seen the movie, doesn't want to have
Hmm.
anything ruined for them, to talk about some more specifics. And I'll talk about some of those questions. But as we're getting into spoilers, and this one probably actually could have been done in non spoilers, but just in case, the
Hmm.
big thing, obviously, that's going to be a talking point about this movie is Nicolas Cage and his performance.
Oh yeah.
So, so let's talk a little bit about this full, unhinged Nick Cage
Hmm.
villain performance. What did you think about that?
So I loved it. And here's what the difference is to me. Nick Cage, better or worse, right or wrong, he's gotten this reputation. I guess it is probably right because he's brought it upon himself. The last several years, especially, he's really gone off the deep end. Maybe in real life and his personal life, but in his acting life, and he's just become known for these performances where he's just doing everything. He's got all the he's got all the gimmicks and he's yelling in his voice and he's very animated and he's doing stuff with his hands and he was doing this stuff back in the 90s. We kind of joked I think once about like in Gone in 60 Seconds, what does he do, like he
Just the
does so,
let's ride
yeah,
thing, yeah.
yeah. And in the Rock, he's really going for it several times and stuff like that. So I think the difference here is obviously he is really going for it here. There's no holding back. But this time to me, it felt like he truly had, along with Osgood Perkins, the director of this movie, it did feel like it wasn't going for it for the sake of just going for it. Like he did create a character. Whereas some of these other like straight to, Tubi movies or whatever he's doing, he's just Nicolas Cage doing Nicolas Cage things. Where it's like, oh, Nicolas Cage is in this new movie where he's, stealing a car and he's wacky and he's, he says weird things and all that stuff. And that's just like him almost leaning into the joke. Whereas this performance to me, it was like, this is a character, a weird character, a crazy off the wall character, but a character. So it never felt to me like, oh boy, Nick Cage, here we go again. I thought this was Nick Cage going for it in the right way. What did you think?
I'm still conflicted on it
Sure, I think that's
because
totally
I
fair.
I walked out and go like, in some ways, what a great performance because it's going to be very memorable. Like you said,
Hmm.
like you're nobody's going to not remember that
Yeah.
performance from Nicolas
Now who?
Cage.
Yeah. No one's gonna be like, now who was the bad guy in that
Yeah,
movie? I don't
yeah,
remember.
I can't picture, but it was very eccentric, and I was like, it's almost yeah. Is it going to be a parody of itself very quickly?
Hmm.
Like if they did a parody movie of it, they could literally not change a thing and have somebody else just come in and do everything exactly the same, and it would immediately be a parody. I did have the thought while watching it, like it almost feels like he studied Chris Elliott's character in Scary Movie 2 to prepare for this
Yeah.
role.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
but so I don't know, like and then ultimately, this is why I wanted this in the spoiler section. This is one of my big kind of questions in the movie. Is it, when it ended, my question was, okay, that was very like chilling, very atmospheric, very creepy movie. But in the end, like, what was it? Like,
Hmm.
what just happened to this movie? And I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
Longlegs was the pseudonym for Nick Cage's eccentric, devil worshipping doll maker character who visits families, but actually then does it through a intermediary, sends them a doll that mind controls them into kill. Like, it's just it gets very complicated, and yet like I'm kind of like, why, and it follows dates, but there's a lot of things that raise questions, and then in the end I'm like, how villainous is his character? Obviously he's very villainous. He's a devil worshiper who's inspiring all
Hmm.
these murders, but I was like, he's not that type of villain where I'm like, I'm afraid of his character. I'm creeped
Hmm.
out by his character.
Hmm.
I don't know that I'm afraid of his character, and I expected to be like afraid of his character. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
It does make sense. Tale as old as time. The satanic worshiper, albino, disfigured guy who puts demonic powers inside of dolls, and yeah, no, and you're right. And when you do say it like that, it's like, oh my gosh, what a convoluted movie. To me, I guess what I think about this, and this includes Nick Cage's performance. Some movies, if they're in good hands and there's good writing and there's a confident director who seems like he knows what he's doing, can really walk that tightrope between I don't really even know what's going on, and you know what, I don't really need to know what's going on, because this movie I think is just, and I certainly don't want to speak for the director or anybody because I haven't heard them say this, but it's like sometimes I think the accomplishment is creating a movie that just so well does such a good job of having, like I said, that feeling of dread. And I'm not saying that like all you gotta do is have a feeling of dread and whatever happens doesn't matter. I'm not saying that at all. But I don't know. There's just something about the way this movie could walk that fine line between like, is this all just a convoluted mess, or is this just some kind of really original, unique story that is just kind of unfolding in front of me? And I was just easily able to lean more towards like, you know what? I don't really need to know the ins and outs, and is this plan even really a plan, and da 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 da. That didn't bother me because it was so effective in just the atmosphere and the mood, and like I said, that sense of dread that hovered over the movie. And you just don't get enough of that kind of stuff to me. It was a movie that I didn't need it to spell everything out for me.
Right. So the other things, yeah, and again, convoluted plot, but I think the thing that I keep drawing in, why I think maybe I'm not willing to dismiss it, is, well, this was convoluted and too many things didn't lead to anywhere because the movie feels too smart
Hmm.
to actually be convoluted and not really have a point to certain things. So my thought is
Hmm.
like, I need to like figure out if I'm just missing some of the things with it. So like beginning of the movie, not the very first scene, but the first scene with the grown up main
Hmm.
character, the girl, when she's on her first mission, and she
Yeah.
identifies the house where the serial killer is, and it's like, okay, she's kind of intuitive, they say, maybe like
Right.
partially psychic, and then they do all those tests. And I'm like, okay, this is an interesting thing. And then I was like, did that ever go anywhere in the movie? Did that ever
Hmm.
like? It felt like it really dropped it right immediately after the beginning and moved on. It
Hmm.
never explored that, and I'm like, well, maybe it did, or maybe it was trying to, you know, point out something like, hey, this girl has a connection of some sort to the supernatural, and
Yeah.
that's the payoff in the end, and like maybe that's the connection. That's the sort of stuff where like I want to watch that YouTube video breakdown that goes, here in the beginning we see her like have this intuition, well that's because of the the connection we don't know about until the end of the film and all of that,
That
like that could actually make
that
it better, but I
yeah.
just don't know it yet.
And I don't know it for sure either. That's how I read it.
Yeah.
Just she's kind of, and again, we're already into spoilers. So like through
Hmm.
this association with her mother, is just kind of drawn into this world of like these, this demonic, I don't know what you want to call it, presence or whatever, all leading her to this, conclusion of this movie. That's kind of how I took it.
Yeah. And then the other thing is I'm a sucker for a good code breaking, that like
Yeah.
he does those letters in the code breaking. In the end though, I just wish I understood a little more like, well, what was the purpose of all that? Like
Hmm.
why was he leaving codes? I know they kind of solved the case through some of her decoding it and all, but it's like So did he want her to solve the case? Was that the point? You know,
Mm-hmm.
to lead, like, I don't know. It just, those things have just been living in my mind and kind of eating at me where I'm like, the answer could make it better, or it could
Mm-hmm.
just drive me nuts if I go, there's not a satisfactory answer at the end of
Mm-hmm.
this.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Where to me, like you can walk that line between like
Mhm.
this doesn't really need to be explained, or this really bugs me that this isn't explained. You know, and I wish I could think of an example of a movie that fell on the other side of things for me, where it was like that was just such a convoluted mess. It took me out of it. And again, I don't know what the difference is. I think it's just like I said, good writing, good performances, confident director. Feels like right or wrong, Oz Perkins had a lot of confidence in this movie and the direction it was going. So that's where I'm just more willing to go along for the ride.
Yeah, I think the difference is probably just that the convoluted mess is not the point at all. You
Mm-hmm.
know, in some movies, the convoluted mess is kind of the point, and you're supposed to get all like mess with your head and be like, oh wow, like they
Mm-hmm.
did all this stuff, and none of that really seems to be the point. The point, like you said, seems to be the tension building and
Mm-hmm.
like the lead up to when she sits down across a table from Nicolas Cage's character
Yeah.
finally in that scene. You don't really care about all the like build up in the tangled web that led to that point. You're just in the moment, like
Mm-hmm.
this. What is he going to do? He's a completely unpredictable, bizarre character,
Yeah.
and so
I
you're
can
just
tell you,
locked in.
I didn't predict, what he was going to do ended up being what he actually did. I didn't see that
Yeah,
coming.
not at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely hear and I get everything you're saying, but and I just I don't know what the difference is. For me, like I said, sometimes I'm just completely willing to go along for the ride, even if the ride is crazy and out there. And this movie, I never for a split second, I was afraid it was going to lose me when it introduced like the idea of the dolls and stuff, and I was like, don't tell me like these dolls are coming to life and doing these murders. Like that's where I thought for a second it might lose me, but it didn't. It did not.
Did did it feel like it lost a little steam at the end when the main villain essentially shifted from Nicolas Cage's character to the mom character?
I think that's a valid point. To me, it didn't be, and because again, going back to performance, I thought the actress Alicia Witt, I thought she did such a good job in that role, and I think they were really smart in the sense of how they, I guess, maybe timed or paced the movie. Where once it does shift, you're not. It's action's not the right word, but like once it does shift, it's got a good momentum to it. I feel like so you're never like, man, it's shifted away from Longlegs. Now it's just a drag. It didn't feel like to me it had enough time to become a drag. I mean, because you get the scene where Longlegs, I assume we're meant to believe he did kill himself by
I
beating
think
his own
so.
face against that table. And I mean, what are you looking at? Maybe 10 to 12, 15 minutes maybe left in the movie, probably would be my guess. So it was definitely a switch, but it never I think because of the pacing and because of Alicia Witt's performance, never it did not bother me.
Yeah. Let's talk a little about that last scene
Yeah.
where, again, this is my issue where I need to understand everything that's happening in a movie. Uh, so, and you can't really understand what's happening with our main character, our main protagonist.
Hmm.
I need to remember the character's name because I can't. I'm afraid to
Oh,
pronounce
I
the
know.
actress's name because
I listened to it. It's Mika. That's how you
Mika.
say it.
See,
Mika.
I would have
I
never
know.
said Mika.
Right?
Lee Harker, that's her character's name. Yeah. So
Yes. Thank
Lee,
you.
yeah, Lee. After her mom, she visits her mom. Her mom shoots the one doll, and she like passes out, and then she
Yes.
comes to, but she's disoriented, and you're like,
Yes.
you're very confused. Like, okay, well, what's happening to her? Is she corrupted now, or is she still good and just
Right.
struck? Like, so when she shows up at her boss's, I guess, house for the daughter's
Hmm.
birthday, you're like, I literally don't know if she's going to end up being villainous and
I
participating in
know.
this murder. I
I
don't know if
know.
she's going to try to save the day, and that's a really cool thing in a movie, not to know where it's going to go. But also, I'm like, I need to understand what's happening to her. What's in
I
this
know.
fog,
I know.
and then she does sort of save the day, but
Right.
kind of takes a little too long to do it. I don't know if you were like me. You're like, do it now, like
Oh
interfere
yeah.
now,
Oh
and she
yeah.
just
Oh yeah.
instead she saves the daughter, but doesn't save anybody else in time.
Yeah.
And then it ends pretty abruptly.
It
It,
does.
it did the it's what we say do. Leave before you've overstayed your welcome. Leave us
Yeah.
wanting more, not wanting less. It certainly does that because they could have given me a few more scenes that I would have been
Yeah.
interested in. I'm not saying it would have made the movie better. It probably wouldn't have made the movie better. But just as
Hmm.
a viewer, you're going like, oh, what happened next? And that's a good actual place to leave.
It is, and I guess a movie like this ultimately leaves you asking, like, is the intent of this movie to show you and to spell out for you exactly what happened to these characters?
Mm-hmm.
Or is the intent again of, like I said, of this movie just to be an effective, creepy thriller, supernatural serial like, and that's why I'm excited to see this movie again. And like I said, this is why I think this will be a good internet movie and a movie that people will theorize about for a long time to come.
Yeah. Um, do you think, as good as the reception has been here initially, that this is a movie that like will actually get like award consideration? I was thinking about that. I was like, it's getting so much positive reviews, but I don't, horror movies obviously don't usually get any sort of recognition
Now,
from particularly the Academy.
I think,
But
I mean,
I would
my heart.
say,
No,
yeah,
go ahead.
if I could just interrupt you, I should have said kind of famously, uh, Silence of the Lambs was the movie that
Yeah.
out of the genre that broke through and did actually get a lot of awards consideration. And I've seen this movie compared to Silence of the Lambs. Obviously, not as far as storyline, but as far as like the its effectiveness and mood and atmosphere. People saying things like the best horror movie since Silence of the Lambs or something like that along those
Oh
lines.
yeah.
So that's what
Yeah.
even made me think like, well, is this going to be an actual like awards contender the way Silence of the Lambs was?
My brain tells me probably not, but my heart hopes that and I think like if you're gonna reward horror, I feel like this is probably as good of one of any. And it's gotten a little bit better over the last several years because of Jordan Peele. Like Get
Mm.
Out is an Academy Award winning movie. I mean, he won Best Screenplay. And I'm not saying this is as powerful, as Get Out. I mean, Get Out really tapped into in a really effective way, into some serious social issues. I'm not sure this movie had such high aspirations. Um, Certainly, wouldn't hurt my feelings for this movie to get an original screenplay nomination.
Yeah.
I mean, the key word is original, and I mean, show me a more original, movie than this. And obviously, there's elements of a lot of movies, Silence of the Lambs, Zodiac. I know there's others, but I mean, what's a more original story this year than Longlegs? And I don't know. Nick Cage has a funny hold over people where people do know he's ridiculous, but yet they love him anyway. So I don't know that I'm confident that it will happen. I would be very happy if he did get a supporting actor nomination, but don't know that I'm ready to hold my breath for that yet. So, but I will be anxious to see if this movie is remembered come award season. I think this movie will sweep up amongst like nerdy like podcasts or YouTubers. Like there's different like YouTube channels I follow that will do like it's like a horror movie channel, like Dead Meat is one of them, and they will do year-end awards, like their own version of the Oscars. And I bet this movie cleans up in like people's own version of like Oscars and awards.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Were you familiar with Oz Perkins' work before this movie?
No, I went back. I have not seen, and I wish I could say differently. I've not seen any of his feature-length movies yet. This is my first experience with him.
It's the same for me. I had not seen anything he's written or directed, and um, they hadn't done a lot, so that's not exactly like it doesn't have an extensive
Right, right, right.
catalog that we've ignored. But this is definitely, I think, his sort of breakout thing.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's one of those performances, or one of those, I'm sorry, not debut. What am I trying to say? One of those breakouts
Yeah,
where
yeah,
I'm like, okay, this guy's interesting. I'm curious to
yeah.
see what he will do next. Where are we going to go from here with Oz Perkins?
Exactly. And whether you like the movie or not, and I've seen people online they're like, "This is the stupidest movie I've ever seen in my life." I mean, I think it would be hard to deny that this guy does have an eye, an eye for good shots, an eye for you know, I don't know, just like even that opening scene of like the girl in the house and the snow and all that stuff. He clearly knows what he's doing. It seems like I said, whether you like the material or not. I mean, I think it would be hard to walk away from this and be like, what a talentless director this guy is.
Yeah, you're right. Very, very great creating that atmosphere and the
Yeah.
eeriness.
Hmm.
Even at times though, where it's um, strains credibility or like realism. So like when they go and visit that barn where that the X marks the spot. It's like
Hmm.
this is such a cinematic setup where they're going at night and a storm's rolling in and they've got
Oh
to use their
yeah.
flashlights. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
any real person goes, we're coming here in the day,
Yeah, I'm not
we don't have
coming
to
here
do
at
all this.
night.
But man, for a horror movie setup, it's like this couldn't be any creepier, and it's
Hmm.
some great filmmaking there.
Oh
And
yeah, absolutely.
and ultimately that scene, like you look back and go, not much happened. They found a doll in the
Yeah,
floorboard. Was all
there
that
wasn't
happened,
even a
but the
there-
buildup was great. The suspense was great through that.
yeah, and there wasn't even like a jump scare. In a lesser movie, at some point, like a cat would have just jumped out of nowhere and scared him. I guess maybe there's a little bit of a jump scare. The doll's eyes kind of open up or whatever. But and I think too, I can tell I already have like a like for Osgood Perkins' work because I love the scene where they do find the doll, and it doesn't do like the big dramatic like zoom in, big music cue. Like it's kind of the overhead shot, and there's the crucifix and they just open up that little panel in the barn and there's just that doll. Like he just let the creepiness speak for itself, so to speak. And it's like that's my kind of stuff right there. We don't need the big dramatic zoom in, or we don't need the close up of the actors like what is this? It's just like the creepiness just was there. And that's the kind of stuff I'm like, I like this. I like this guy.
For sure. Definitely has talent. And of course, as many people have pointed out, he's sort of horror movie. Uh, I don't know, he's not royalty, but his father being, uh,
Yeah.
you know,
Anthony
Anthony
Perkins.
Perkins from Psycho.
Yeah.
Uh, just it doesn't really mean anything, but somehow it lends like
It's kind of like a
credibility.
cool,
Yeah,
yeah, just kind of like a cool connection, cool piece of trivia.
for sure. So one more time, the lead actress's name that you heard
Micah,
pronounced,
Mika
Mika.
Monroe is that's how I heard it pronounced.
Yeah. I had not seen her in much. In fact, the one movie that I had seen her in was Independence Day Resurgence, which is a terrible movie. And she's blonde in that, looked totally different. And so, like, this was just a totally different look for her in a great way.
Hmm.
She seems like she's becoming one of like the more popular modern scream queens, though, because I look at her IMDb. She's done several um, well-known horror movies. One of them being It Follows, which is one I never watched, but I heard was a very uh, well-received horror movie from several
One of
years
my
ago.
one of my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah. So is she an actress that you're you know a fan of now, or have become a fan of before this, maybe?
So definitely now after this, it follows. Like if we were doing the podcast in 2000, I think 14, as it follows, I can promise you that would have been on my top 5 of the year list. And she did another movie a couple years ago. It's called like The Watcher or something like that, which is kind of an effective little. It's not a groundbreaking movie, but I liked it too. So yeah, after this, I'm definitely interested. I thought she was excellent in this movie. I thought she was excellent, and I thought she really benefited from a well written character, even though like kind of a sneaky well written character, because really her character's trait is that she's just super awkward and weird around people.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that that's easy to pull off. It's not as simple as just being like, okay, actress, just act like you don't want to be around these people. I mean, it takes, like we've always said on here, movies and acting are, just a series of choices. And the choices that she had to make, I thought she did excellent in this movie. I thought she was well cast, and I really liked her character. What did you think?
I thought she did a really good job.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. Uh, I did think it was. This is kind of just an aside, but I thought it was incredible how even in this movie that is just full of dread, they did manage in my theater at least to get a couple of laughs out of the Mika Monroe character's awkwardness, specifically when she first meets her boss's little girl, and just the awkwardness of those two sitting in a room trying to have a conversation together actually got some audible laughs in our theater. So just a really well done Just a really good job by her. And I was really fascinated, I guess, by the writing of that character, because for a hot minute there, like I was like, are they leaning into this character almost being like autistic in a way? Like the way she was so good with like numbers and being able to decipher these codes, and specifically where she's like, she kind of cracks the code and figures out about this barn, and she's like, it's 136 miles to the barn. You know, like just the way she was so exact and precise with her numbers. I thought that was just an interesting character beat.
Yeah, you're right. It was a very different than the usual heroine in a horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is usually either supposed to be kind of the everyman, or every woman, or I don't know. Yeah, just it's
Well,
usually not like this. Not usually an interesting, unique character themselves. That's what I'll say.
and that's the thing too. Like even a great performance like Jodie Foster in Silence of the Lambs, great performance. I'm not knocking it at all. But it does feel like a lot of times they lean into like the, oh man, like I'm a woman in a man's world, so I have to be a spitfire and work twice as hard, and that's all great and it's effective. But I feel like we've seen that a lot. Or like the I'm the take no crap woman, and I don't these men, I don't care. Like we've seen all that. So to have this character that is just very, just everything's internal for her, and she's awkward and clearly is not interested in being around a lot of people. Like I did think it may not have been the most exciting scene, but I thought it was an effective scene for the character. At the beginning, after she's been studying all the case files, where her boss is like, "Let's go have a drink," and I don't drink, it's like very clearly she doesn't want to be there, and she's just kind of sitting there uncomfortably. That was good
Yeah,
character stuff, I thought. And like I said, just a different beat than, well, I'm the spunky underdog, or I'm the, what I mean? Like we've seen all those characters before. So I thought this was a great original um, twist on the female protagonist, like in a serial killer crime movie.
yeah, and the guy who played, again, I guess sort of her boss, but she sort of partners around with,
Mm-hmm.
played by Blair Underwood. Thought
Mm-hmm.
he did a great job, and he's one of those
Me too.
guys where I was like, I feel like I've seen this guy in 100 movies, but as I look through
Right.
his IMDb, I'm like, I actually haven't seen that much of
Mm-hmm.
his stuff, but he just has that presence of like, oh yeah, like this guy, he just shows up and you're like, yep, this guy's good. I don't know, he just
Yeah.
has one of those
Yeah.
presence about him. Thought he did a
He
really good job.
he fills the shoes really well.
Yes.
And I really like too, like I guess something that elevates this movie to me into that like best of the year type of category is, I always appreciate when movies, like we've talked about it on here before, like when the characters in a movie, even if it's a far out movie like Longlegs, when characters will say the things that they need to say. So I really appreciated the scene where the Blair Underwood character sits down with the Mika Monroe character, and he's like, isn't it kind of a coincidence that once you became involved, this 30-year-old case all of a sudden just broke wide open? You know what I'm talking about? Like they're sitting in
Yeah.
his office, and it's like, yeah, somebody needs to say that because it is super weird. Like, it's just those little things that I always appreciate, and the little things that will elevate a movie from, that was a pretty good, like, creepy movie, to like, this is why I can really sink my teeth into this movie. Because even in the midst of this ridiculous movie about demonic possession or all these things that it is, it's like, okay, thank you, character, for saying what you should say. And so like I appreciate stuff like that. And he does it well.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I just thought that was, again, I'm going to go back to Osgood Perkins, like really well written, really good writing. And kind of like in a movie that is not at all about, cliches or expectations or playing it safe, like taking just a little moment to give, like an audience member like myself who's seen a trillion horror movies, to give me that scene that I needed. Whereas like, I'm so glad that everyone's not just ignoring the fact that this lady comes on this case and then all of a sudden it's a really hot case. Like, thank you for that. It feels like a reward.
Yeah. There are some examples that are a little bit the opposite of that, though. Like
Mm-hmm.
you know, you said people saying the things they need to say, where she doesn't ever share the things that you're like, you need to
Mm-hmm.
share. So when
I do have one
she
major
gets a
nitpick.
visit at her house, and he drops
Yes,
off the
that's my
note,
nitpick.
and you're like, immediately tell everybody, hey, he brought this note to my house, and you know I had a
That
near encounter with him, and he actually like helped me decode the stuff that he has with some hints about
I
what it
agree.
is. Yeah,
I agree, and that is totally fair. And it was the same thing where it was like, man, she's really like, so he drops that letter off in her house. She sees him. Like, she straight up sees him. And then it's just like, well, he must be gone. So I'm just going to sit with my back to the room and open, and read through this letter. I think that's definitely fair. And that's something I clocked right away. I'll be interested, like you're saying, to go online and see if it's like a whole, like, well, but this was just because of, these demonic forces. Like, she's on this path that she cannot stop no matter what she does. So I don't know if someone will find some way to excuse it through that kind of logic or not. But no, I definitely clocked that. Was like, man, she's pretty chill considering the most creepy, terrifying serial killer ever was just in her living room 3 minutes ago. So that's totally fair.
yeah. Um, did you see? I've seen it a couple places online where Oz Perkins said that he doesn't watch modern horror movies, and it
I did see that.
specifically pointed out like he hadn't seen Maxxxine or won't watch Maxxxine,
Yes.
and I thought that was interesting, just as another recent horror movie that's kind of popped.
Yeah.
In,
So he's on the big. Osgood Perkins is on the big picture right now. Sean
mm,
Fennessy interviews him, and I listened to that interview after I'd seen the movie. Of course, he definitely comes across as I don't know if full of himself is the right word. Very confident in himself, I would say. Yeah, he does not hold back his opinions. He definitely, yeah, he's something. I would recommend you listen to that interview with him.
yeah, I'm sure. I like. Yeah, again, you watch a movie like this, that's his vision, writing and directing, and you go, well, he's clearly an interesting guy
He's an interesting guy.
to have concocted something like this and made
And
it.
I will tell you something very interesting he says in that interview. He's talking to Sean Fennessy and he talks about how, he makes these movies and he's almost exclusive to like the horror thriller genre. And he said, all my movies, have some kind of meaning or message or whatever. And he's talking about how in this movie he wanted to ultimately tell a story about like the sacrifices a parent will make for their child. Meaning like the
Yeah,
there's we're well into spoilers now. So there's the scene where Longlegs has the mother, bless you.
thank you.
Longlegs has the mother like bound and tied up, and he's like, "Here's your choice. You can save your daughter," And so it's like he's like, I like the idea of like a mother took on this, obviously very extreme in the case of this movie, like burden, and kept that from her child. And I was like, man, it's so interesting how these really creative minds work, where it's like you created the movie Long Legs out of this desire to tell a story about what parents will do to protect their children and what they will protect their children from.
Yeah, it's in the IMDb trivia that Nicolas Cage and Oz Perkins made the movie as a tribute to their mothers.
To their
And
mothers.
I'm like, their mothers gonna be like, yeah, thanks.
Thanks a lot. I really
is that how
appreciate
you
that.
view us? Yeah.
And Oz Perkins,
Yeah,
sorry, he also talks about how and again, this is where he comes across as a little pretentious, but he's like, I almost wanted to make a movie that I don't remember if he used a phrase like making fun of, or it's like kind of like taking like the Silence of the Lambs or the Zodiac and kind of flipping it up on its head a little bit. So I don't know. It's an interesting interview, and he's clearly a super intelligent guy. And he knows that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, that's how he comes across. Like, he is the smartest guy in the room and he knows that and he's not afraid to tell you that. But listen, he had me with this movie. And, I don't mean to jump all over the place, but, going back to performances again, I just want to shout out Alicia Witt. The only thing I knew her from is she was like the heroine in the movie Urban Legend in like the late 90s, which was just a very cookie cutter movie. I mean, a somewhat original idea, and it was, it's a so-so movie, but it's like, man, I didn't know she had something like this in her. What did you think of that performance?
I thought she was really good. I went and looked it up because, again, just like the other cop that I was saying, she has a look that I was like, I feel like I've seen her in a bunch of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go through her IMDb and I'm like, nope, I have not seen like anything that she's done, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought she did a really good job.
And I think too, like, you watch that movie and you're, in the beginning or middle or whenever it is when they're like the main character is having these conversations with her mom. Like, you kind of get it. You think you get it where you're like, okay, this girl's mom is obviously very, very odd, very, it's like I just thought like this character only exists to show you that the main character, the Mika Monroe character, just came from a very strange, odd childhood. I had no clue, the mom character would play such a huge role in this movie.
Yeah, and it definitely recontextualizes some of the conversations they have in the end with the
Yep.
reveals.
Yep.
One of the main ones just being early the conversations. The mom is always asking her, "Have you said your prayers?" And then they're
Yep.
together at one point, and she just says, "Just be honest. Do you say your prayers?" And the Harker character says, "I actually never say them because they scare me." And the mom just
Mm-hmm.
goes, you think like the mom's gonna like, I don't know, berate her because she's always on her about it. And she's like, "No, you're right. They won't actually do you any good." And
Yeah,
it's
they don't
like,
do anything. You're like, whoa.
yeah.
Yeah.
But then when you know why, because she's like, "Well, yeah, we're already actually sort of in a pact with the devil."
Yeah, like
I
we're
was kind of
screwed.
was kind
So
of hoping maybe it would help you out a little, but probably
yeah,
not because we're in this pact with the devil.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And you're right. Like, and again, that goes back to like just good writing, good storytelling, where you can look backwards on their conversations and the way that character behaves. Where it's like, oh, she's not just playing like the, just the weird old mom, like the it's like you almost think the opposite. Of like this is I've seen this character before. This is like the mega religious, overprotective, overbearing character who's now older and kind of losing her marbles a little bit and lives in the cluttery old house and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, I did find this fascinating also from the IMDb trivia, and I just feel like this has to be mentioned. According to this trivia, Oz Perkins only thought of two actors to play Longlegs: Nicolas Cage and Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
What a different movie that would have been.
Yeah. Do you think Pitt could have pulled it off?
Again, like pulled it off
It's
is
so
such
hard
a
to even say.
strange question because like it just would have been so different.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no way Pitt is quite doing that eccentric of a performance. Not because Pitt
Probably
can't
not.
do like just nobody can do eccentric like Nicolas Cage.
Nick Cage. Yeah.
I mean, he is probably because he has to be slightly deranged himself.
Oh
So he's
yeah.
just literally just like they're just going go full you is all they have to
Yeah.
say. Brad Pitt would have
Just-
to tap into something that's so different from himself, whereas
Mhm.
Cage is just releasing himself entirely.
Right. I tell you what, I would have bought the ticket to see Brad Pitt try to pull off some kind of character like this. I really
Yeah.
would have. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure Oz Perkins would have said that's his way of taking Seven and flipping on its head by making Brad Pitt the crazy
Yeah, exactly.
killer and all or something. But
Yeah.
I just could you imagine writing a part in a movie and you go like, "There's only two people who could pull this part off: Nick Cage or Brad Pitt," and people are going to be going,
Yeah.
"What part is this?"
What is this? And then once when you explain it, it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, but yeah, it really is impossible to imagine now that once you see it, picturing anybody but Nicolas Cage doing that performance, which is funny to say because he's under a lot of, I'm guessing, prosthetics and makeup. It doesn't look like Nick Cage. Like it's Nick Cage.
You know it is, but
yeah, it's not. It doesn't. You don't look at it and go, "Oh, Nick Cage."
you don't. And they do such a great job, and this has been done in other movies. I thought they did a great job of how much and how little they use the Longlegs character. And I did appreciate the fact that you really like, unless I missed something, you really don't even get an explanation as to why he calls himself Longlegs. Do you?
No, you don't. No, that was another one of my like kind of questions. Is like, is that just?
Did he give himself that name just because it's weird? Or
yeah. He makes a reference to it in that first scene that I thought, well, I guess we'll get an explanation later what he meant when he's like, did he say something about like wearing my long legs today or something like that?
Yep.
And
but
that's it.
I'm so glad we didn't get like the flashback to when this character was a child, and it's like, oh, because you've seen this in movies before where it's like, oh, he has that nickname because he was raised by abusive parents, and they used to recite this poem or something with long legs in it while they were beating him, and so it's like, so they fill in so much backstory that all of a sudden the character is just not near as creepy and mysterious and weird and entertaining. So I thought they did a great balance of like what you learn about the character versus what you don't learn about the character. And again, unless I missed something, like I also liked what they chose not to show you from the police procedural side of things, because they're like, okay, let's go on a manhunt for this character. And the next thing you know it, they pull up to him and they capture him at a bus stop, but you don't even learn how they caught him. Like, a lot of movies will have the scene where it's like he left this clue and he didn't even realize it, and now he's going to be exactly at this place at this time. We don't even get that, and we don't need it, honestly. So I thought that was a nice balance of like what it chooses to tell you versus what it's just like, yeah, you've seen all this before. We don't need to show you. We don't need that cliched scene of them figuring out exactly where this character is going to be and at what time.
Yeah, you're right. That was a kind of surprising leap forward in time.
It was.
I
It
get how
is.
long it
It's
was,
definitely.
but I wasn't offended. I wasn't like, hey, you skipped something. I was like, oh, cool. We're just
No,
going right to it.
we're going for it because we've seen this scene before. We don't need to see it
Yeah.
again.
I do wonder when Nicolas Cage read the screenplay for this movie, if, and obviously we've talked about it plenty. He's not exactly at the top of his career right now,
Right.
and probably isn't always getting the meatiest lead parts and that sort of thing. But watching this, I was kind of like, man, he's not in a lot of this movie. It's one of these performances that's probably, again, referencing Silence of the Lambs, how Hopkins' character of Hannibal Lecter is actually like in it a surprisingly little in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
He's got like a total 10 minutes of screen time or something like that.
It's something like 10 or 13 or something. Now.
And it's probably very similar for Nick Cage in this movie, where he doesn't have a lot of screen time. Even though, so Nick Cage is like, hey, you're going to have like 10 minutes total screen time. You're going to be in prosthetics and makeup and look hardly like yourself. You're not even, the final act villain, basically.
Yeah.
And then, so you're going to come in and be 10 minutes of hardly looking like yourself, the setup villain, and be eccentric and crazy. What do you think? So kudos to Nick Cage for going like, yeah, that sounds like a part that I can really sink my teeth into.
Yeah, like you said, kudos to Cage too, because like even though his career has really taken a nosedive, like he's got to still have some clout and some stroke around. So it's like
because they still use his name to sell the movie.
Absolutely. So kudos for him again, and Oz Perkins confirms this in that interview with Fantasy, where he's like Nicolas Cage did not come in and take this over, and he wasn't like it sounds like the Longlegs character really was an Osgood Perkins creation, and he just found the perfect kind of vessel for that creation in Nick Cage. But it wasn't like Nick Cage, the way he made it sound is like Nick Cage did not have like, well, here's 50 notes I have about this character. Like sounded like he was very willing to just do his best to portray the vision that Oz Perkins had. So yeah, I mean, it's easy to make fun of Nick Cage, but kudos to him. I will say, like, and I think that does him so many favors. Like, too much of this character, it turns into like, man, Nick Cage just took over this movie with his Nick Cage stuff. And I think it would be really hard to say that, would be like, well, he just really, swallowed this movie up.
Yeah, I mean, Nick Cage, maybe that's sort of his sweet spot at this point in his career is he's like a strong seasoning, just the right amount of it, and it really gives on you too much of it, and it's like, oh, it's off-putting.
Like,
so
way too much,
just the right amount of Nick Cage seasoning in this movie.
Yep. Kudos to him for being willing to do this, and especially considering a lot of the gimmick of this movie is how little you see Longlegs' face. I mean, the movie goes far out of its way, as the advertisements did, to not show you his face at all. So, just kudos to him.
Yeah, which I'm glad, by the way, because that was maybe the creepiest and scariest thing about the movie was just how he looked. I didn't want to spend a lot of time looking at Nick Cage's character.
I don't need to see that big weird face up on the screen. So,
yeah. So, just kind of quickly, don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but because I already brought this up, it came after another horror movie, Maxxxine, which I also saw this week, and I know you saw. So, just curious your thoughts on that one, since it is another big horror movie that came out just recently. And Oz Perkins wasn't willing to watch it, but we both did. So
we did.
Yeah, what were your thoughts on Maxxxine?
I liked it. I have a lot of admiration for Mia Goth and her commitment, I guess, to this Maxxxine character now over the course of 2 movies and a prequel where she's also playing the younger version of the old lady from X. It sounds Pearl. Confusing, but it's Pearl. Yeah. To me, again, as a horror movie fan, Maxxine was rewarding to me. There's a lot of references to like De Palma movies. Who he never made like outright horror movies, but he made a very specific kind of like that sleazy killer on the loose, grittiness of the 80s. Like he made movies like that. There's some Psycho references, some pretty overt ones like with the actual Psycho house. And I thought it was a lot of fun. It felt to me like Ty West and Mia Goth, who really created this trilogy together, just we're having a lot of fun, like kind of with the sleaziness of like 80s Hollywood. So I appreciated that. Not a movie, not a top 5 or anything for me, but I certainly was glad I saw it, and I appreciate that trilogy as a whole. But Mia Goth's the one that you really, to me, just walks away with that, and you're like, man, this girl is talented, and she will go for it. So, how about you?
I think you summed up my feelings pretty well. I think this is probably, if I ranked out of that trilogy, how I felt about the movies, it'd probably be third out of the trilogy.
I would agree.
But all pretty close together. And you said the key thing that I was going to be my point was just that I feel like they have a lot of fun with these movies. They're not taking themselves overly seriously, and that's kind of what I enjoy about the movies. They're very much just sort of popcorn flicks. They're not meant to do anything to. We talk about Longlegs sticking with you, and having to think through all this stuff and be like, oh man, it stays with you for a while. Maxxine's meant to be consumed and be like, huh, that was interesting, and move on. And that's what I did with it. So I thought it did what it was designed to do, I guess is what I would say.
I thought so too. And I think, if you really wanted to try and dig a little bit into it, it's probably a movie about, the Maxxine character, even in X too, just about like, how far someone's willing to go for, fame and fortune and stuff like that. There's probably some stuff in there like that. So yeah, I was happy with it. It wasn't a perfect movie by any means, but it was enjoyable, and it was really fun to watch Kevin Bacon just go full sleazeball. I thought that was really fun.
Yeah, Kevin Bacon he's a national treasure. I think he's one of those guys with a really long and successful career without ever being like he's never quite been an A-lister.
Nope, so but he's always kind of hovering around it.
Yeah, and he's always been actually just really good. Like he's a talented actor.
He doesn't hurt movies, that's for sure. But and I think too, just kind of going along with talking about Maxxine and Longlegs and stuff, I just think like, and I've said it on here before, just a great year in my opinion for horror. And I am very, very happy as a horror fan with the way this year's gone. Even, Late Night with the Devil, First Omen, Abigail, Immaculate, Longlegs, Maxxine, like just a great year. In a Violent Nature, I am very satisfied as a horror movie fan from 2024. So I hope that continues.
Yeah, I think Late Night with the Devil is probably still my favorite in that genre of on the year. Are there any good horror movies coming up that you know of on the slate that you're looking forward to?
I saw at both Maxxine and Longlegs, which, I saw Maxxine last week, Longlegs this week. I think every preview we saw was horror, but those trailers were leaning heavily into kind of like that artsy horror. Like there's, we saw a preview for a movie called Cuckoo, which just looks really odd, like a body horror movie and very interesting and weird. And it's also from Neon, the studio that did Longlegs. There's one, I think it's an A24 movie that's with Hugh Grant. Did you see the preview for that where he kind of like
entraps I've not
these
seen
two
a preview,
girls?
But I've heard a little bit about it.
Yeah. Hey, unfortunately, the trailer, there's probably more to it, but like he entraps these two girls in his house. So that looks interesting.
I think it's called Heretic.
Yes,
maybe?
Heretic.
Yeah.
Heretic. Yeah. So really, it's not even one movie I'm looking forward to. What I just hope continues throughout the rest of this year and the future is that we just keep getting well-made horror movies. Because I feel like that's what we've gotten this year. Even if they're all, they may not be everyone's cup of tea, and like you will, admit that you're not a horror guy, but I feel like we're getting well-made horror movies and a nice variety. We've gotten Abigail, which was almost like a horror comedy in a way. We're getting in a Violent Nature, which is, a new twist on the 80s kind of slasher movies. We're getting Late Night with the Devil, which was just this a really original, kind of a new twist on found footage. So I hope we just keep getting quality stuff. I don't really care what it, if it's found footage, if it's, an homage to 80s Hollywood. I don't care as long as it's well made. So super duper happy with the horror slate this year.
And I'm really happy for you, Andy. Glad that you're
Thank you.
getting what you want from horror
Yeah.
this movie or this year. Next week we've got a legacy sequel.
Yeah.
That one that we're actually excited about, because usually legacy sequels are a disaster. This one is a legacy sequel disaster movie that we're excited about. And that, of course, is Twisters, starring our guy Glenn Powell.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know about you. I'm planning on going to see it on the IMAX. Hopefully. Hopefully Friday night. I'm not quite sure yet. I know this is one that I've got family actually interested in going to see. So it's a little trickier to go schedule things when other people are involved, because if it's just me, I go whenever I want to go. But
so that's the same issue I'm getting into. Everybody I know, like all my family, wants to go see this movie. So I probably should go ahead and point out I will be the reason we're a little late next week on our podcast, because I will be gone on Sunday. So we'll, just keep your eyes peeled, because we're going to do one, just be a couple days late. Yeah, but I am excited.
I just want to shout out, because we won't be doing a podcast on the actual day, but the 17th, which is 3 days from now, is the 1 year anniversary of our first episode being shared with the world. So on our next podcast is when I really want to kind of just celebrate that for a moment now. But I think it's cool that we've been able to do this for a year now.
Oh man, it's been a blast, and I appreciate you and all the work you do to get this podcast out to the world. So it's been so much fun. I look forward to it every single week. Never once have I, for a second, gotten tired of talking with you about movies.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, because we're going to keep doing it. So
absolutely.
Hey, 1 year down, more to come.
Oh yeah, just the start. I don't want to throw us off topic. I do want to run back to Longlegs just really fast.
Yes,
I would like to know if there was one person on planet Earth that would have predicted that the movie Longlegs, when the closing credits started, would be playing the song "Bang a Gong" or whatever what is the actual? Did you clock that? Like how random? Song, yeah. I was like, of course, that's the song that plays at the end of this movie, and the credits are rolling in reverse.
Yeah, the reverse credits, I definitely noticed. That was
I was like, oh my gosh,
that's interesting.
Again, I just wanted to throw that out real quick, because I love little just weird touches like that on movies. So
yeah, for sure. And my last thing on Longlegs, sort of along those lines, is I'm always fascinated on the choices to shoot things in different ratios. So every time they flash back, they went to that narrowed square style, whatever. And, when the movie starts, for that first scene going like that, it's like, oh, is this movie just going to be a really square framed up movie, and then it expands out, and then it goes back, and that's always interesting.
I really love too how when the title card did pop up at the beginning, once Nick Cage is leaning down and it goes to a title card before you see his full face, it had that 70s grindhousey kind of grainy look to the title card, and I just thought that was great. So right off the bat, I was like, yes, I love this movie already, and it just really worked for me. I love stuff like that, and it did my thing that I really like when movies do. It had chapters to it.
Yeah,
really for no reason.
Yeah,
but I still like it.
When the chapters popped up, I was like, this movie is for Andy. Is what I thought. Yeah, I know he likes chapters.
I do like chapters. Right. I don't even know why I like it.
Out, and it wouldn't have done anything different for the movie. But
it makes no difference at all that there's chapters. But I think it just kind of adds to that uniqueness of a movie like this. So I was a big fan of that. But I didn't mean to derail us. We are very excited about our 1 year, and I'm thankful for 1 year and many more to come of doing this with you.
Yeah. So next week we'll be talking, or whatever, slightly after next week. When we do get around to record that episode, we're gonna be talking Twisters. We'll talk a little bit of just Twister.
I could talk Twister for a long time.
So yeah, we'll try not to have that episode be too long when we got to talk hopefully two great movies to talk about.
I hope so, because it's going to be a real bummer of an episode if we're both super disappointed in Twisters.
I guess that's the good news about, well, if that's the case, at least we can just lean heavy on Twister, and
that's true. That's
talk
true.
Positive about that. And then the following week we got Deadpool and Wolverine, so we got a couple of exciting episodes coming up ahead of us.
A really stacked July. I'm really happy about that.
Yeah. So hopefully everybody else is equally as excited about that. I hope people have gone to see Longlegs. Like I said, it seems like people are going to see it. So
It blew away the opening weekend for the Neon Studios. Like the previous record, I think was like $6 million, which was I think immaculate, or it was like 5.8 million or something. I think this opened to like 22 or 23 million.
that's the
So
number I saw was I think 22
yeah,
million. Yeah.
yeah. So job well done. Because like we said right at the top, what and I would just want to mention it again. What a phenomenal marketing campaign for this movie. Applause to Neon Studios and Oz Perkins and anyone that was involved in this. This is how you do it.
Yes. Other studios take notes, learn the lessons, do
Mm-hmm.
likewise.
Yep. It doesn't have to be weird like the marketing was for this, but you hit the nail right on the head. It has to build curiosity, and this movie obviously did that.
Yeah. So go reward your curiosity, people. Go see Longlegs.
Go
Let
see
us know what
Longlegs.
you think. Tell us if you know if you're a horror movie. Like preface it with this: say I'm a horror movie fan and I love the movie, or I'm not a horror movie fan. You know what? I actually enjoyed this one. That's
Yep.
I like to hear both sides.
Me too. And if we missed some details, or if you have a better explanation of this movie than we did, then share it because I'm all ears.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So thank you guys for joining us for this
Thank you.
discussion, and we will look forward to seeing you guys next time.
See ya.